Greenland looks empty on a map, a massive white space most people scroll past without a second thought. It appears lifeless, frozen, and irrelevant, exactly how powerful territories are meant to look before they matter. Empires don't fear places that are loud and crowded. They fear places that are silent and untouched. Silence means opportunity, and opportunity attracts power long before the public notices. For decades, Greenland has been marketed as remote, poor, and insignificant to global affairs. But history shows that the most dangerous locations are the ones dismissed as useless. The illusion of emptiness is often the first layer of control, because when no one is watching, decisions are easier to make. Greenland's population is smaller than many American towns, yet its landmass rivals major powers. That imbalance alone should raise questions no one is asking. Why would such a massive territory exist without becoming a battleground of influence? Why would the world's most powerful nations suddenly care about a frozen island? The answer lies in what Greenland represents, not what it appears to be. This island is not empty. It is undiscovered leverage. And leverage in geopolitics is more valuable than armies. When ice hides resources, it also hides intentions. What looks like nothing is often everything waiting to be claimed. Empires don't announce their interest. They normalize it quietly. Greenland was never ignored. It was being patiently observed, and observation is always the first step before control. Throughout history, empires expand toward the edges once their centers are secure. The North has always been a final frontier for dominant powers. Rome expanded outward, Britain ruled the seas, and modern empires now look to the poles. The North represents safety, distance, and strategic insulation from chaos. When empires fear instability, they seek cold, remote ground. Cold regions slow enemies, preserve assets, and reduce population resistance. That's why northern expansion often happens quietly, wrapped in logistics and defense. The Arctic is not a wasteland, it is a fortress waiting to be armed. Control the North, and you control the roots beneath it. History shows that whoever dominates trade corridors dominates power flows. As the world heats up politically and economically, the cold becomes attractive. Greenland sits at the northern crossroads of North America, Europe, and Russia. That positioning alone makes it priceless. No empire ignores geography. It obeys it. The North is where empires prepare for long-term survival. It's where they place backups, reserves, and last lines of defense. Greenland is not being targeted for today, it's being positioned for tomorrow. And tomorrow's wars won't be fought where yesterday's were. The North is not the end of the world, it's the beginning of the next phase. Every empire eventually looks north when it senses change coming. The United States has never been absent from Greenland. It has simply been quiet. Military installations already exist, officially labeled as defensive necessities. Radar systems, air bases, and surveillance infrastructure are embedded into the ice. These are not temporary structures, they are long-term commitments. Governments don't invest billions into frozen ground without future intentions. Official narratives call it protection, monitoring, and cooperation. But protection always raises a critical question. Protection from whom? The U.S. frames its presence as stability, not dominance. Yet stability often becomes control when one side provides all the security. Greenland's defense is already deeply integrated with American systems. Integration is the modern version of occupation. No flags need to change for power to shift. Control today is invisible, technical, and contractual. Once infrastructure depends on one power, independence becomes theoretical. Greenland cannot remove these systems without losing protection, and protection once given is rarely taken back willingly. This is how influence becomes permanent without confrontation. No invasion headlines, no resistance movements, no outrage. Just a slow normalization of presence. And normalization is how ownership begins. Climate change didn't just melt ice, it rewrote global strategy. Routes once blocked for centuries are now opening seasonally. New shipping lanes cut weeks off global trade. Whoever controls these routes controls speed, cost, and leverage. The Arctic is no longer theoretical. It is operational. Greenland sits directly along these emerging corridors. This turns ice into infrastructure and geography into power. Nations are racing not to stop climate change, but to benefit from it. The melting Arctic is a silent invitation to competition. Ports, bases, and monitoring systems are being planned years ahead. Control now determines dominance later. Once routes are established, they become permanent. Greenland transforms from isolation to intersection. Intersection points always attract militarization. Trade routes inevitably require protection. Protection inevitably brings force. Force inevitably brings ownership. This cycle has repeated for thousands of years. The Arctic is not opening peacefully. It is opening strategically. And Greenland is standing in the center of that opening. Ice doesn't just hide land, it hides wealth. Beneath Greenland lies rare earth minerals critical to modern technology. These minerals power smartphones, missiles, satellites, and electric vehicles. Whoever controls rare earths controls the future economy. Right now, global supply chains are fragile and weaponized. Dependence is the new vulnerability. Greenland represents independence from foreign suppliers. That alone makes it strategically irresistible. As ice recedes, extraction becomes possible, then inevitable. Mining brings infrastructure, labor, and foreign interests. Foreign interests bring influence. Influence reshapes local decision-making. Greenland's economy could become dependent before it becomes wealthy. Dependency is easier to manage than resistance. Resources have always justified intervention throughout history. They are framed as development, progress, and opportunity. But resources rarely benefit those who sit on them. They benefit those who extract, protect, and export them. Under the ice is not just mineral wealth, it's leverage. And leverage changes everything. China never announces its intentions loudly. It tests boundaries where silence already exists. Greenland appeared on Beijing's radar long before headlines ever mentioned it. Not as territory, but as opportunity wrapped in neutrality. Chinese firms approached Greenland through investment, research, and infrastructure proposals. Airports, ports, mining projects, all framed as economic cooperation. This is how modern power enters without soldiers. Where capital flows, influence follows patiently. China understands that ownership today begins with partnership. Western governments labeled these moves as concerns, never accusations. Concern is the language used when action is already late. The US did not panic because China arrived. It panicked because China arrived first. Greenland became a quiet testing ground for influence competition. Every rejected Chinese proposal triggered stronger American attention. Not out of care for Greenland, but fear of exclusion. Empires tolerate many things, but not rivals near their borders. China's interest reframed Greenland from peripheral to critical overnight. Once a rival sees value, the game changes permanently. Greenland stopped being neutral the moment others wanted it. The island became a signal, not a place. And signals always demand a response. Russia does not view the Arctic as expansion. It views it as survival memory. Cold terrain shaped Russian history, defense, and endurance. The Arctic is where Russia feels strategically comfortable. Over the last decade, Moscow has rebuilt Arctic bases once abandoned. Airfields, missile systems, and ice-capable fleets returned quietly. This wasn't provocation, it was preparation. Russia expects the Arctic to become contested ground. Greenland sits directly across this emerging frontier. Geography turns proximity into threat without intention. The US sees Greenland as early warning against Russian reach. Radar and detection systems are not defensive luxuries. They are necessities. Whoever controls Greenland sees first and reacts first. In modern warfare, reaction time decides outcomes. Russia understands this, and so does Washington. This isn't about conflict today, but positioning for tomorrow. Militaries plan decades ahead, not election cycles. Greenland becomes a stabilizer or vulnerability depending on who dominates it. Neutral ground doesn't survive between competing powers, it becomes absorbed into one system or another. The Arctic remembers every empire that failed to prepare. Officially, Greenland belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark. Legally, sovereignty appears clear and uncontested. Operationally, power tells a different story. Denmark cannot defend Greenland alone. Security responsibilities quietly fall to NATO, and by extension, the United States. Defense dependence reshapes authority over time. Decisions start requiring approval, coordination, and alignment. Alignment slowly replaces independence. Greenland's autonomy exists within boundaries defined by larger powers. When security is outsourced, leverage is surrendered. Denmark manages governance, not strategy. Strategy belongs to those with assets on the ground. American infrastructure outweighs Danish political control. This imbalance makes formal ownership symbolic. Symbols satisfy law, not power. Greenland's future cannot contradict American security interests. When interests collide, protection always wins. This is not coercion, it's structural inevitability. Modern empires don't conquer governments, they outgrow them. Denmark still signs documents, but the direction is already set. When Trump suggested buying Greenland, the world laughed. Media framed it as absurd, childish, and unserious. But strategic institutions did not dismiss the idea so easily. Purchasing territory is not irrational in imperial history. It's efficient, legal, and bloodless. The proposal exposed a truth leaders rarely admit publicly. Greenland's value had already been calculated. The joke wasn't the idea, it was saying it out loud. Empires prefer quiet expansion, not public negotiation. Trump violated the unspoken rule of subtlety. After the backlash, discussion didn't end. It went underground. Strategic interest doesn't disappear because optics fail. It simply changes language. Acquisition became partnership. Ownership became responsibility. Control became protection. The goal never changed, only the narrative did. History often mocks the messenger, not the message. Greenland didn't become less valuable after the laughter faded. It became more carefully pursued. NATO presents itself as a defensive alliance. Defense, however, requires positioning before threats materialize. Greenland fits perfectly into NATO's northern shield. Surveillance, interception, and deterrence converge there. Once integrated, separation becomes impossible. NATO does not need ownership to exercise control. Standardization of systems achieves the same result. Bases operate under shared command structures. Shared command dilutes local authority. Greenland becomes part of a larger machine. Machines do not respect borders, they optimize efficiency. Efficiency demands permanence. Temporary measures quietly turn permanent. Security architecture hardens over time. Reversal becomes unthinkable. Greenland's role shifts from protected land to strategic asset. Assets are maintained, not consulted. This is how alliances reshape geography, not through force, but through necessity. And necessity is the most persuasive justification of all. Greenland is not important because of where it is, but because of what passes near it when the world shifts. As Arctic routes open, traffic doesn't disperse evenly. It funnels through narrow corridors that demand control. Chokepoints are where empires stop pretending trade is neutral. Whoever governs the flow of goods governs the rhythm of economies far away. Greenland sits above emerging routes that shorten distances between continents by weeks. Time savings translate directly into strategic advantage. Faster trade means faster military movement disguised as commerce. Commercial lanes and defense corridors always overlap eventually. History shows that choke points never remain civilian for long. Protection of trade slowly justifies permanent presence. Presence becomes surveillance. Surveillance becomes authority over access. Authority over access becomes leverage during crisis. Greenland's geography transforms it into a silent gatekeeper. Gatekeepers don't need to speak to exercise power. The world won't notice control being established, only when it's enforced. By then, alternatives will already be gone. This is how geography stops being passive and starts issuing commands. Greenland doesn't need to choose dominance. Dominance arrives simply by standing where history reroutes itself. Empires rarely collapse without first preparing contingency ground. History remembers this pattern even when textbooks avoid it. When influence weakens elsewhere, power concentrates in fewer, safer locations. These locations are distant, defensible, and resource secure. Greenland fits this profile too perfectly to be coincidence. It offers isolation without irrelevance, distance without disconnection. In a fractured world, remoteness becomes resilience. Greenland provides strategic depth in case global systems destabilize. Financial crises, supply chain failures, or large-scale conflict all demand fallback positions. Empires that fail to plan exits don't survive transitions. Greenland represents continuity when other regions become volatile. This is not paranoia, it is institutional foresight. Militaries and planners think in terms of worst outcomes, not optimism. The island becomes a geopolitical lifeboat. Lifeboats are never shared equally. They are secured early and defended fiercely. Control over Greenland is control over future options. Options are the true currency of power, and empires hoard options when they sense uncertainty rising. Modern empires no longer arrive with armies and declarations. They arrive with agreements, frameworks, and shared objectives. Control today is administrative before it is physical. First comes cooperation, then dependency disguised as efficiency. Systems integrate quietly while sovereignty remains on paper. Over time, decisions require coordination instead of consent. Coordination slowly replaces choice. Infrastructure locks in relationships long before politics reacts. Once systems are interconnected, withdrawal becomes too costly. This is how permanence is achieved without confrontation. Greenland's defense, economy, and logistics begin to align outward. Alignment narrows future pathways. Narrow pathways make alternative futures unrealistic. No takeover announcement is needed when exit becomes impossible. This is not conquest, it is absorption. Absorption feels voluntary until resistance becomes impractical. By then, the debate is already over. Control is complete long before anyone names it. History later pretends it happened naturally. Every strategic takeover has a moment when reversal quietly dies. It is never announced and rarely recognized at the time. It happens when dependence outweighs autonomy, when protection costs less than independence, when alternatives exist only in theory. Greenland is approaching that threshold. Defense systems, trade reliance, and strategic planning converge. Each layer adds friction to the idea of separation. Political autonomy remains, but operational freedom erodes. At a certain point, choice becomes symbolic. Symbols comfort citizens but don't alter outcomes. The world continues calling Greenland autonomous, but autonomy without leverage is ceremonial. Once the point of no return is crossed, intentions no longer matter. Even good faith cannot undo structural dependence. This is the silent danger of gradual control. It feels stable, reasonable, and safe. Until one day, alternatives are requested and denied. The denial won't sound aggressive, it will sound procedural. Greenland is not being taken violently, and that's what makes this moment dangerous. History warns that the quiet transitions are the most permanent. When control arrives politely, resistance rarely forms in time. The United States may never claim Greenland outright. It may never need to. Influence can achieve what ownership once did. The question is not whether Greenland will be controlled. The question is who will control it by default. As ice melts and competition sharpens, neutrality becomes unsustainable. The world is entering an era where geography chooses sides. Greenland sits exposed to that decision. This is not a story about aggression, but inevitability. Empires don't always conquer. Sometimes they simply arrive early. And those who arrive early define the rules forever. Greenland's future is being shaped quietly, professionally, and legally. No crisis will announce the shift. No invasion will mark the moment. One day, control will simply be assumed, and only then will the world ask how it happened. By then, it will already be too late.